Hi, and welcome to this first part of our Houdini Railroad series. In this series, start with creating some attributes over our curves and then create a basic parameter interface so we can play around with what we've created. So without further ado, let's dive into Houdini. In Houdini, we're going to start off with some curves, but first we have to create a geometry node. In our geometry node, I'm going to create my first curve, and I'm just going to set some basic points. And this will create our initial line. Right now that is a line of 50 units or 50 meters. I want to test my tool out to multiple curves. So I'm going to create another curve and I'm going to create more points that we can actually switch and see what we're doing on different curves. I'm just going to create some random numbers. You can see we have a different setup. We have a line or a curve that goes both up in the y-axis, goes in the x value and in the z value, so we can check our curves. And then I want to easily switch between them, so the most convenient thing is just placing a switch. Then what I'm going to create is a null node and an output node. And the output node is pretty convenient because it will always put something out when you put it into the subnet. And as you know, with Dokai, we use our own format of colors and shapes for nodes. So I'm going to set the shapes and colors to the corresponding format. Then this null, I'm going to call this my in curve. And for now, I'm just going to call this out. Alright. Oh, we don't need to visualize node. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a subnet. And this subnet is going to be, eventually it's going to be our final HDA. So we're just going to call this train track generator. And I'm jumping in. As we can see, we have 3 nodes that we don't really use. I usually color them dark gray, so when I look out on any other nodes, it looks like there's no input there. It's just my own way of saying, okay, these are not connected at all. Alright, so the first thing that I actually want to do is I want to create some attributes. Create a subnet. I'm going to place that right after our input curve. I'm going to color this dark green. And I'm going to call this initial attributes. And I'm going to copy this input curve null node. Call these gray again. Paste my ink curve here. I'm going to hit L so everything nicely gets displayed. Turn off the colors because we don't really need that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an attribute delete. And the reason why I'm doing this is because in programs like Unreal or other programs where we can use our Houdini digital assets or HDAs, it's that sometimes we get some pretty annoying attributes that can mess up whatever we have. And I want to create all those on my own, so I actually have control over them. That's the first thing we do. Then I'm going to create a resample node. That's our first resample node. And then I'm going to create a second resample node. And I'm going to set this second resample node to about 1 unit length. Put this one to subdivision curves. So what we get right now is, if I look at our lines, and let's switch to the second line, you can see I have points turned on. At the moment I dive in here, I resample it, we get a lot of small points, and then I resample it again, and then we get these points. So now what I could do is, using the first resample's 3 polygons as, I can change the flow. So using this very small segment length, we can actually create more points in a better curve. And here I can change what type of curve it is. And then after we've done that, I resample it again, but using subdivision curves again, so we get a nice smooth shape. And that's exactly what we want for our railroads. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a poly frame. And using our polyframe, I'm going to set our tangents to be our normals. Basically what that does is it creates a normal along our curve, and that is very convenient for placing assets on our curve. So turn on my point normals and zoom in quite a bit. Can I see it? It's not showing. Oh, this point trails. This is our point normals. So now you can see very small. We have normals pointing from our points. So if I was not to do that, we don't have any normals here. Then using the polyframe, it actually points to the next point, which is very convenient. All right, so after that, all we have to do is creating our up attribute. And that's to make sure that we always have our objects facing up when we're making curves, so we don't get any unnecessary banking or whatever. I'll just create up. To remember that it's a vector. So instead of a float, we want a vector, and we want to have it going up. So 1 in the y value. And then finally, I'm creating another null node, or I could actually create an output node as well here. I'm gonna set this to our own standard. So I'm going to say color, and I'm going to call this out. And since this is still our curve, this is our initial curve. All right. Focus a little bit. So we have our initial attributes, and that's good because from there on we can actually start creating some cool stuff. So let's start off and create another subnet, and I'm going to call this, I'm going to color this light green, so I know this is going to be containing our geometry. I'm going to call this rails. Again, the same thing when diving in. I'm coloring the last three input nodes gray, so we don't have anything there. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a control node, so another null node, and I'm going to call this control. I'm going to color this nice bright color, and change the shape to a circle. Now we have our control node. And the first thing that I want to do is in this parameter interface, I actually want to create a folder. Make these ones invisible because we don't really need them. This is going to be our curve settings. And I want to have this as a simple. So if I were to set this to say tabs, so it usually is by default, you get a nice tab. If I set it to a simple, it will disappear. Bam. The reason why it's disappearing is because there's nothing in there. The first thing we want to do about our curves, we actually want to say, okay, so it's nice that we had these two resamples. The first thing I want to be able is to select this. We'll get an error if we try to drag this one in like we usually do, since it's outside of our subnet, which makes sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to recreate this. I'm going to go to ordered menu, put that in there. We're just going to call it type for now. Curve type, and we are going to go into our channels. I basically always wanted to have it at subdivision, which is the second input, so 0, 1, 2, input 1, and then we're just going to recreate what it says. So 0 is going to be our straight edges. I'm just going to type in straight. Then the second one, or our number 1, is going to be subdivided. And our last one is going to be interpolating. We hit apply. And now if we go back out, and we check our control node, we have a nice node. You can see pressing Control middle mouse button, we go to our default settings, which is the subdivided. Now all we have to do is copy this parameter, go into our attributes, into our resample, and then paste it as relative reference. So I'm going to close this one down. And if we look at our control node, which is right here, we can change this. If I'm looking at our curve, we can easily see by setting this, we still have a nice division of about 1 unit going straight, and we have that as a subdivision curve types, which is really nice. Okay, so I'm going to add this one in here, and we're going to start off with our rails. So again, the first thing that I want to do when I'm creating my initial rails here is I want to create our input curve node. Paste that here, hit L so we get our nice layout. Alright, so we got our curve. And what I want to do is I want to create a line, set the direction to 1, and then I want to sweep this line using a sweep. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure that our line is in the middle, because we usually want to generate from the middle. So I'm going to grab my length and paste that relative reference in here. I'm going to give this a negative value, and then I'm going to divide it by 2 or multiply by 0.5. As multiplications are faster. We get a nice flow in here. That's pretty nice. Gives us a view of what the sleepers would look like, but for now we're creating the rails. So I'm going to group whatever it is that we have right now, and just for the sake of making everything clear, I'm just going to call this group trek with delete. Alright, so we have our group. It's nice. Then I'm going to use the add node. I'm going to say polygons group, skip every endpoint. I'll show you why. Right now, it's going to go over point, 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 point. If we skip, we get a nice line along the curves. Now it's important that note that if I'm going to change, say, the amount of points here, we're messing up. So just to make sure that doesn't happen, I'm going to say paste relative reference there as well. So we have the same value. But for now, 2 is fine. Then I'm using a Ballast node, and the group that we created, which is this group, I'm just going to hit Ctrl C, Ctrl P. The moment I hook that up, we get our nice output. The cool thing is by using this line right now, just by changing the length, we can actually change the width of our tracks. And that's pretty much what we need. But just having one set of tracks is not really that cool. We're going to create some preset. So I have our first line here, and for now, just to show that we can actually quickly change, set this one to 0.5. And here I'm going to set it to 1, and then this one I'm going to set to 1.5. Create a switch node in here. If you do some research to tracks, you can see that we have a lot of different gauges. And a gauge is basically the width between the two tracks. So now, if I'm going to go and view this one, I can actually change those very easily. So let's add that to our train track control node. So again, go to the parameter interface, I'm going to create another folder. Again, I'm going to say simple one. This is going to be our track settings, or let's actually call it rail settings, because the whole thing is called a train track, and that's multiple things, and we want to just create settings for our rails. Apply. Okay, and again, we actually want to have another ordered menu. In this menu, I'm going to create some presets. So this is going to be our rail gauge. Let's just call it gauge. And then in our channels, usually there's 3 or 4 main used tracks. We're going to go for our first value, which is narrow. Then the second one is medium, and the last one, you would say large, but it's actually called standard. Alright, so hit apply. Now we have a nice thing. For this as well, I'm going to set it to 1. Medium is usually the track that's nice and in between, and we can hit apply. We actually want to be able to control those different values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a float. Put that under here, and then in our flow channel, name the parameters. And we're gonna call this narrow gauge. Apply. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna quickly duplicate this. I'm gonna change it from narrow, standard, and medium. Hit apply. Now we have our three values. Doing a little bit of research, we can see we have a lot of different values. And usually the gauge types are based on a country. So it depends, or mostly on a region. So an example, in Russia they have different gauges as across Europe. And in the States they have different sets again, and then in Asia they have different sets again. For now we're just going to use these values. And narrow gauge, I'm just going to say that our values are going up to, say, 1000. So 600 to 1000. So for our narrow gauge, our range is going to be 600 to 1000. We could actually set our narrow gauge to gauge and then just say millimeters. I'm just going to do that for all of them. I'm going to lock the values because I don't want to go over them. I just want to be able to switch between them. And then same goes for the other ones. I'm going to lock all of them. I'm going to look again at my values. I'm seeing 1067, 1435. And then for the last one, our standard gauge. Okay, so I did that. Now all we have to do is set our default values. Hitting accept. Now you can see we can actually change our gauges. But the thing that we're still missing is our connectivity here. Just gonna hit copy, parameter, going back into our rails, in our curves. So this first one, length, just gonna paste relative reference, and of course this now is gonna be way too big. So we're gonna multiply this by 0.001. That actually gives us our value in meters. So we can do the same thing, just copy this one to our second line. Instead of narrow, we do it with medium, and the last one, our standard. All right, just gonna hit L so we get our nice layout here. And now you can see when we go out, we look at our rails using our control node. If I set it to narrow, I can change this side. I set it to medium. Oh, it's not working. You know why? We didn't copy this parameter yet into our switch node. Now it's working. So again, selecting control, can change this size, and finally standard, we can change this size. But I don't want to have these three gauges here. I'm going to go back to our parameter interface. This one is called rail gauge. I'm going to copy this, then in our gauge width, I'm just going to say hide when. Curly brackets, type the name of our parameter, and I'm going to say if it's not equal to, our first value is going to be 0, and then I'm going to close curly brackets. So what this does is it hides it when it's not 0, which is convenient because we have multiple values. So accept, and for medium, I'm going to do the same, but since this is our second input, call it 1, hit apply, and then our final one, hide it when it's number 2, or third input. And as you see, now narrow, only one shows up, medium, second one shows up, standard, last one shows up. All right, well that basically does it for initial curve of our rail. So we're going to continue, but we actually know that we might be able to use these curves later on. So I'm going to create another null node, and I'm going to call this out track lines. Again, using our convention of coloring, and since this is not the output node of our system, it's still pointing down. Okay, well the next thing is that what we actually want to do is we actually want to create a nice shape that we can sweep along our curve. Create a curve, And I'm gonna go in our, let's say, our front viewport. I'm gonna zoom in really small, so I want to have a very small unit. Also gonna create a box, just so I get a sense of feeling of the size. And let's say, how big would our rail track be? For now, I'm gonna go with 20 centimeters tall by 15 centimeters wide. Okay, so now when I'm looking at our box here, I'm actually gonna say, move this up a little bit so we actually have a nice 0 point here. Okay, now if I'm gonna grab my curve, hit enter, we can actually draw. I'm just quickly gonna draw this by hand, just the general shape. I'm really not paying too much attention to what I'm doing actually. So don't worry about the symmetrical art that I'm creating. Alright, I'm gonna delete our box. And there we have our very beautiful shape of what would be the cut through or side view of a track. I'm gonna create a sweep node. This is going to be our cross section in our backbone. And now, if I go back, turn off our points and point normals. And in our sweep, and say in our output, we skin. We get our beautiful curve. That already creates quite a nice shape. But what would be cooler is if we were to do a facet just in front of the sweep, and we remove our incline points. And what this does, if I look at our initial curve, and I'll show points again so we can see it a little bit better, they're now all set to a value of 1, which is fine. But if we actually want to remove our incline points, and we up this value a bit, we can see that on straight pieces it doesn't create as many points. And for our rail, that's perfectly fine, because it will create less polygons without actually affecting the shape too much, which is super convenient. As you can see, it still gets generated quite nicely. Still open on the ends, so what we're going to do is just create a polycap, which is a polyfill. Hook that up. There we have our ends. Now, the thing that I don't really like about doing it like this is that we do the whole thing in one go, and I'd rather create a for loop. So we're going to say for each primitive, and I'm just going to hook this up here. So it's going to go in here, and you can see when we do a single pass, we actually get our single rails. The cool thing about it is that because our curves are not entirely bent the same way, this facet will go over each curve separately and then sweep it separately, and that's a lot more convenient for us. I'm going to hit L again so we get our nice layout. I'm going to turn this off from single pass so merge all iterations. Alright, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to color our stuff. So we actually can do some color coding. And for now, I'm just going to color this one very bright red. We can immediately see that the color that we've given, it's not really corresponding with our red. It has a bluish hue. It basically shows that our normals are wrong. Or another way, that everything is pointing inwards. So if we just place a reverse and then place our normal node, we get our nice red color. Perfect. I'm going to create a group node, and this is actually going to be our output node as well. As we know with our settings, color and shape it, and I'm going to call this out rails. We don't actually want to call it group 2, so we're just going to call it rails. Alright, hitting L again, now we have our nice setup right here. Perfect. So obviously the second thing that we need to create are our sleepers. And I'm going to do it again. I'm going to create a subnet. And I'm going to color it green because we have geometry in it. And I'm just going to call this sleepers. Again, I'm diving in. coloring these dark gray. And this is just the format that we're using. Of course, you don't have to use that. Just gonna copy this one again. Paste that in there, hit L, got a nice layout. And then here, I'm gonna resample. And the reason why I'm resampling this is because I actually want to set the distance between each sleeper. And I'm gonna go for a subdivision curve again. The distance that we have now, I'm just gonna hit F, it's not locked up yet, so hook it up in there. So this is our initial curve, we have our nice points, then our resample. This is way too much. So if you actually do some research, obviously we have different types of sleepers. We're gonna come to that a little bit later. For now, we're gonna focus on the first one, and that's a wooden sleeper. And in our wooden sleepers, the distance between each sleeper usually is a set distance. That's actually 90 centimeters. So we can very easily resample this, and now we have our sleeper points, so to speak. Very convenient there. All we now have to do is create a box. I'm just going to create a box, but you could use your custom sleeper in here. So you could have, say, an artist created in Maya or whatever with all the nice textures and everything you need. Just import that here. Then I'm going to say copy the points. I'm just going to pack and instance it, so that's easier for now and a lot faster. And as you see, it's completely messed up. And the reason why is very simple. We haven't set this one yet. The average size of a wooden sleeper, I actually have some pretty big sleepers. It's about 2.5 meters, 2.6 actually. They're not that tall, about 15 centimeters. And then again, 25 centimeters width. So you can see these are pretty big. We actually want to say that this value, whatever this one is, paste relative. I'm just going to divide it so that whenever we look at it, it's nicely on the floor. However, if we look at our train tracks right now and we were to merge them, and we look at it, doesn't really look too good now, does it? That is because they're not on top of each other. So what we can do is we can go in our rails and we could have our curve, place a transform before the sweep. It's important that you do the transformations before you sweep. And then in this value, you can actually go for the bounding box. So we're going to say bounding box. And we're going to look outside of this net, and we know it's our box right now. I'm going to set it to our box. And then I want to have the maximum value. So the Y max. Closing it. And now it's giving us a 0 value, and it's giving us an error. What is the error? It's a bad node reference. So apparently I made a mistake. Bounding box, sleeper box, size Y, D max. So what we can also do, just to make sure, we can copy this parameter. Okay, I'm really stupid. Sorry for that. We actually want the value of the entire box. We don't need its Y size. So backspace, and you can see it moves it nicely up. Yeah, that's when you work too much with expressions. As you can see, now it places it nicely on there. I'm going to turn off my points, and we already start to get a really nice curve. And if we go out there, and we grab our switch, and focus on this one, you can see it works on both curves. Cool. Next up, let's create some parameters. So we know that, like I said before, we have different types of sleepers. And in this tutorial, I'm just going to give you 2. That's good, right? I'm just going to copy this one. And I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, 2.5 in length. And the width is going to be 15 as well. Okay, so we have our wooden sleepers here, and I'm actually going to create some concrete sleepers. And if you don't know the difference, you can search online. This is the basic wooden sleeper that I found online. And then here we have an example of all 3 different types of sleepers that I could easily find online. So you can see we have concrete sleepers, some steel sleepers, and we have wooden sleepers. Wooden sleepers are generally pretty far away from each other compared to our concrete sleepers. So the distance between our concrete sleepers is actually what makes it so different. So that means we need another resample node. In general, the resample size, grab this one in here, for concrete sleepers is about 65 centimeters. Set that here. Then again, copy our points, and instead of this one, I want this box, and instead of this resample, I want this resample. So placing a switch node, we can easily change between our concrete sleepers and our wooden sleepers. And go and color them again. Hit color. And for now, I'm just going to turn off pack an instance, so I can actually color them a little bit better. I'm going to give them a bright color as well. Let's say bright orange, yellow kind of color. And another group node, which is going to be our output node. We call this sleepers. I usually name the groups that I need all in capitals. It just feels easier. And voila, there we got it. Now we're going back to our control node, change our parameter interface, create another folder. I'm going to call it sleeper settings and apply. Create another ordered menu. I really like these. You can see I use them a lot. It's quite convenient. Doesn't matter what you use them for switch nodes or other stuff. It's easy to give you input value. Right, so these are going to be our types. So sleeper type. We need to create our menu. Wooden, one value is going to be concrete, and then we could even say, okay, eventually if I want to go on, I want to create a steel, except copy the parameter, going in our sleepers, switch node, just paste relative reference. And now when we look here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You see we're missing our normals. Now you can see that easily we can switch between our gauge types, and we can choose our different types of sleepers. That all looks good. And the next part of our tutorial is going to be our ballast. So we're going to create another subnet. And you don't necessarily have to create subnets. You could also just create like these colored, what are they called? Network boxes. But I just find it convenient to have something that looks like a really small system. Just for my own overview. Okay, so let's call this Ballast. And we immediately get an error because, oh my god, no, not everything is in there. Doesn't matter. Alright, so again, we'll create a null node. Call this inCurve. Hook it up, color it, shape it. Alright, let's create some ballast. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another facet node and remove the incline points. As I don't really want to go over all these details too much, I'm just going to copy this parameter so I only have to change it in one node. Alright, perfect. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a grid. I'm going to turn this on right now. You can see not really going too well. I'm going to create a sweep so you can actually see what's going on. Alright. Let's say in our output we actually want to skin on closed, and there we go, really messed up. So what we're going to do is in the grid, I'm just going to set the rows and columns to 2, and then our plane, I'm going to set it to XY. Okay, now for the sizing, it's kind of important that we get it fairly right. I'm going to say 3 meters wide, 3 meters wide, and we only want it very small, going up about 10 centimeters right now. We need to give the feel that it comes off from the ground, but it doesn't really need to be that down. Okay, then for our channel reference again, I'm going to say channel reference, bracket, then we're going to have our size Y value, and we're going to multiply that again by 0.5. Did I make a mistake? Yes, I forgot a bracket. There we go. Okay, so now we got stuff here nicely on the floor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to transform our points, our 0 and 1 point. Say I'm going to have them 0.8 right now. You'll see later why. There we go. Well, of course we have to set this to points, else nothing works. Okay, now I'm going to create another transform, and that's going to be 2 and 3. Again, points. This is going to be our width, not sit. It's also cool, but alright. And this is going to be our height. Create a polyfill. So we have our end caps, normal, and color. And then, of course, our outputs, which is out ballast. L. We actually want this to be at our normal. And as you can see, nice blue color in our out ballast. It looks like it's upside down, but that's because I'm going to create some parameters for this. So if you just look at this one for now, I have our control node here. I'm going to create another folder. Again, simple, and we're going to call this our ballast settings. I want to be able to choose if we actually want ballast or not. Because if you look at a lot of reference, you sometimes see that, especially with concrete sleepers, there's not always ballast. If you're like having an urban region or it's placed on top of big concrete bridges, usually there's no ballast. I actually want to have a toggle. I can say, okay, do we actually want to have ballast or not? For now, I'm just going to call this toggle as well. Then the second thing I want is I want to have a float for our ballast width and our ballast height. Hit apply as well. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I don't really like this interface setting, so I can use this horizontally join the next parameter, which is nice because it puts there, but this looks really bad then. And I can just turn off the label. Alright, now if I actually turn this off or on, I want these ones to work as well. So what I'm going to do in here, so I'm not going to say hide like we did before, I'm just going to say disable when ballast underscore toggle equals 0. So when it's 0, we have it disabled. And now when we click this, it'll actually show up, which is really cool. Right, let's turn this on. We actually want this ballast now to have some parameters that we can use. For our height, I'm going to set this one to 0.10, 0.1, and our width is going to be 1 as well. That's our default value. And now if I copy this parameter, in our ballast, I go to this transforms that we have. So the first one that we copied was our width, and I'm just going to say add whatever we have here. And that gives us a nice slope. We go back to our control node, copy, go to our height, and I'm just going to say that we translate these ones based on relative reference. Cool. Now all I have to do is this height node. It's going to give us for our sleepers and everything else to go up. If we go in our sleepers, we have our box. We can actually say translate, tap translate, or transform. And we're going to use our Y translate. I'm just going to move this up. Again, we're using the bounding box. And you can see it moves up nicely. There's this other box as well. And then the only thing we still have to do is our rail. And our rail is now set with our transform to the sleepers. So again, transform. Just transform one is okay. Right, so now we have turn off point numbers. Very nice color-coded rails that we can easily switch to any input curve that we have. And the cool thing is, say that I were to, I don't know, use another transform and scale. You can see the curve scales. Make this really big for now. And all the stuff nicely updates. So we get a very low amount of polygons in the straight pieces. Again, all the way. And then at the corners, you get a lot more detail. You can go up and down. The rail still looks perfectly straight. Well, that does it for this episode of this series. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to support us, go to our Patreon and see what we got for you. Thanks, and for now, this was Dokai. Bye bye.